Russian invasion of Ukraine is in its second week. While President Putin is set to launch his strategic plan to Poland, Ukrainian cities and close in on Kyiv, the West is preparing a counter-plan. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is all set to launch an international plan of action against Russia. This is to ensure that the country's invasion of Ukraine fails. Johnson's office said that Prime Minister will hold a number of diplomatic meetings next week.
With the US and the European Union, we've brought in the biggest package of global sanctions ever imposed on Russia, and we will go further unless and until this aggression stops. The world is turning its back on Putin and his regime. Global corporations are severing ties with Russia, participation in sporting events is being cancelled, and nation after nation is taking a stand. The vice is tightening its grip, and it will continue to tighten.
The Prime Minister has urged world leaders to join his six-point plan. The plan aims to respond to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It offers humanitarian support to Ukraine and slaps economic sanctions on Russia. UK Prime Minister also calls for diplomatic path for de-escalation with full involvement of Ukraine's government and a stronger security in the European Atlantic era. It aims to put an end to what Johnson called the creeping normalization of Russian activities in Ukraine. Sanctions against Russian businessmen will be the first sent to the UK Parliament on Monday. Johnson is scheduled to meet with leaders from Canada and the Netherlands next week. The meeting will be held in London. After that, he will also meet leaders from the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland and Slovakia. UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has warned Putin not to underestimate the West. In an interview with the Sunday Telegraph, Wallace told Putin not to test the West. He said any existential threat will be met with response. He indicated that the UK could pour more funds into light weapons, which could wreak havoc on Russian tanks and aircraft in Ukraine. UK Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab also said that Ukrainian forces had proved a tougher prospect than Putin had expected, and that economic sanctions had put the squeeze on the Russian president.
They have definitely proved a tougher prospect than Putin expected, and that has an effect on morale on the Russian side as well. Of course, at the same time, we've imposed the biggest sanctions package I can remember, with devastating consequences in terms of the ruble, fallen to record low, the stock market, and also we've seen the Russian central bank, which itself has been subject to sanctions, doubling interest rates. That has put the squeeze on Putin. What he's now doing is responding with ever more brutal tactics.
Meanwhile, Turkish President Erdogan has urged his Russian counterpart to stop the invasion of Ukraine. Erdogan has called for an urgent general ceasefire. Earlier, Erdogan's spokesperson said it is naive to expect talks between Moscow and Kyiv to yield results as fighting rages on. Turkey is a member of NATO. The country shares good relations with both Russia and Ukraine. Turkey has established close cooperation with Russia in defense, energy and trade. But it has also sold drones to Kyiv, a move that angered Moscow. Ankara has deemed the invasion of Ukraine unacceptable. At the same time, it has opposed sanctions on Moscow. Presidential spokesperson Ibrahim Kalin said that Erdogan would urge Putin to give ceasefire a chance and stop the attacks, and also help set up a corridor for evacuation of civilians. He also said that it was important for Moscow to have a reliable counterpart at a time when the West has been burning bridges. Vasyl Filipchuk is a Ukrainian diplomat and is currently the chairman of International Center for Policy Studies. Vasyl is now joining us live from Poland to talk more about the latest in this 11-day-old conflict. Vasyl, welcome to WION.
Happy to see you.
Now, the list of sanctions against Putin and Russia continues. Putin has once again set conditions for ending Moscow's invasion into Ukraine. Do you think the sanctions by the West and actions by countries like the US or UK are deterring Putin, or are rather making him more feisty and aggressive?
Well, no one expected the West would ever launch such kind of sanction package as we see, so it's very good. But compared to the challenge we all face with the view of Putin's aggression, it's certainly not enough. I just returned from Polish-Ukrainian border, and I am deeply shocked with huge disaster, with huge humanitarian disaster we see now on the Ukrainian-Polish border, where still there is no Putin arms there, but you see huge suffering of people. Millions of people are suffering, leaving Ukraine from their homes in search for shelter. And what I know from my friends in Kiev and other Ukrainian cities, what Putin is doing, it can be compared only to Nazi crimes during the Second World War. So whatever sanctions we are talking about sanctions like against Hitler in 1941. Sanctions is not enough. The world must make stronger efforts to stop this barbaric behavior of Russian president. I think the only things like expulsion of Russia from United Nations, blocking its membership in United Nations Security Council, declaring a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and making everything just to stop Putin now, everything must be done. Especially what is important, I would like also attract attention to two very important countries now in the world, India and China, which have not yet aligned to sanctions against Russia. When you give hand to Putin, you give hand to a killer, to a person who is now killing literally every day Ukrainians. Just some minutes ago, last news was how Russians killed a family of Ukrainians trying to leave Ukraine city of Irpin. And, because of social media, you can just see it online, and you just see how this Russian bomb is falling, and 4 people, 2 adults and 2 children are killed. How we can talk after this barbarian actions to Putin? I think India and China must immediately join Western sanctions to block any contacts with Putin's Russia.
Vasyl, let's remain sensitive on this matter because it is an ongoing conflict, so we need to also maintain our sensitivity to this matter. But what do you make of NATO's stance in this conflict, that it will not be part of the conflict in Ukraine? NATO says it will keep options of diplomacy open, and that their main objective is to prevent an escalation, and they do not want a war with Russia.
Well, it's clear in case if Russia attacks any of NATO countries, then US will have to defend these countries. And if US engages, it's basically nuclear war. It's Third World War with all the unimaginable consequences. So we understand why NATO is standing aside, but NATO cannot pretend it's not their war. Russians attack us because we wanted to be in NATO. Now, of course, there's huge disillusionment with NATO in Ukraine. We understand NATO will never defend us, but it doesn't mean NATO has just to send us humanitarian assistance. NATO must arm Ukraine every day more and more. Otherwise, it will come to NATO as well, sooner or later.
Finally, Mr. Vasyl, Europe never anticipated the refugee influx of this magnitude. How is the continent going to handle the surge and the assimilation of these refugees, despite these friendly countries like Poland saying they can and will accommodate them? And why is it important for countries at war to open humanitarian corridors?
Well, it's an extremely important question. First of all, I just arrived to Polish-Ukrainian border with humanitarian cargo from Belgium. So I could see everywhere in Poland, in Germany, how people are demonstrating solidarity with Ukraine. It's really everywhere. On every tank station we stop, I've seen a number of cars going to the border. So it's on one side, it's really great sign of solidarity with us. But on the other side, it's not enough. I've seen yesterday how about, I think, 7, maybe 10,000 people, mainly women and small children, are standing for 20, 25, 30 hours in their queues to cross Polish-Ukrainian border, and it's -2, -5 degrees yesterday night. It was in Eastern Europe, so it's quite a challenge. I think European Union must immediately open borders to establish refugee camps and to take Ukrainians as their own citizens. There is no any other choice. Otherwise, people will be just dying on Ukrainian-Polish border.
Vasyl Filipchuk, thank you very much for your insights. We'll have to leave it there, and for talking to WION today. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.